Hi again, I'm Rashmi. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Museum of Goa, Subodh and Yadu, who's been so nicely and constantly reaching out to me for information. I've been not giving him stuff on time, hence the 5-minute delay. I apologize for that, and thanks for coming on time. But I'll take you through overall what the talk promises, but I hope there's going to be a conversation. So it's not going to be me speaking and then there being a Q&A. After a point of time, after some initial introduction about what context we're operating in, I'd like us to have a conversation about what's going on here. I just want to put it out there that I'm not coming from a place saying that this is what's happening in Goa and from the outside giving that perspective, but processing it from what we've been doing as research, and also would like to hear from you to add to that conversation in that sense. So I'll first begin by introducing the other one. Okay, so in the first part, this is what I'd broadly like to cover, a little bit about what we do at the Artex company. Previously, when I've given such talks, I've been told that typically when we talk about careers in the arts, it encompasses two ends of the spectrum, one side being a space or a venue, and the other side being the maker or the artist. And there isn't enough of a context of operation for someone who is making things happen across these spaces. For instance, an arts manager being one, but the other side is also arts consultancy services. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing with the Artex company, and then move on to talking about, I don't know how many of you are on the Facebook group famously called Arts and Culture, Jobs, Opportunities, Residencies. Okay, so a few, which is now we've rebranded it Arts, Culture, Resources India because you can't have such a big title. Little bit about that. Then moving on very quickly to understanding the arts ecosystem in India and how is that different from, the kind of broader cultural studies context that we've been working with across the world. A little bit about, of course, the arts management context in India, and then moving on to Goa and relocating all of this sort of broader theoretical knowledge in the Goan context. So a little bit about Artex to begin with. We're a consulting agency. We work in these three areas. We look at consulting, research, and project management. We've been around for about 3 years. We are genre agnostic. We don't work within particular genres. We work across visual arts, literary arts, performing arts, and that's what we like doing. We don't like sitting into the boundaries, and hence the colors and sort of almost a formless form that we work with. Primarily, our business is to focus on the business of value. We want to generate value for the cultural sector, and we believe there are two primary ways in which we can do that. One being people. So how can we generate audiences for the work that we're producing and putting together? And the other is data, developing evidence to support the work that we are doing. And we don't have that much of a context that's going on and in operation in this country as well. So those are the two areas that we cover, and aside from that, what typically ends up happening is that most of our clients are like, abhi aap ye kar rahe ho to ye bhi kar do, and that's where the creative project management comes in. It becomes a bit of a cash cow because they want us to do more, and we don't really, sometimes you can't say no because of the relationship. Everything in the cultural sector works on the relationship, so you want to continue working with them, you enjoy working with them, and which is where we sort of moved more and more into the creative project management. We just finished a conference yesterday we did for the Piramal Museum on Art Laws of India and the Antiquities and Art Act of 1972. So you also get to learn a lot of very, very interesting contexts of work in the sector. So a little bit about our expertise. Mainly as consultants, we have wide knowledge about the sector, but also expertise in sector research and outreach. Event planning, as arts managers, everybody knows how to run events and run them really well. So it's not really a great shakes thing, but apparently it is a skill. So it's put there. This one thing that I'd like to highlight is knowledge about the Indian cultural and media landscape. We don't have enough reading material and theoretical knowledge about this space. And the last 3 years of our work in the research space has allowed us the privilege to get access to some of that information and develop some insights on the basis of primary research. So that is something that we are confident of and are like aching to build continuously. And an extensive network of contacts across the world. A little bit about the kind of people that we've worked with. One of the logos that's missing, I just realized, is the Serendipity Arts Festival. We're currently working on the impact analysis report for the last festival that just happened in 2018. Just a bit of a glimpse of what we've done. So everything from like like I mentioned, presentations, children's sessions, Malakam outside the CSMVS Museum, Lamni, so it's across genres in some sense. So I just wanted to sort of give you a little bit of this context before we move into the next part. So that, like I was mentioning, the two areas of value, we work mainly with organizations because we feel if we can impact organizations, it impacts people, impacts the cultural sector, it impacts artists. And that's where we go into strategy consulting. We mainly work with vision, mission, and then moving into audiences. Because audience development cannot be marketing. It has to follow through from what do you envision as the kind of audience you'd like to have in your space, and it begins from there in that sense. And under sector development, we look at, of course, arts research and the Facebook group. Funny thing about the Facebook group that it didn't start out as a formal group whatsoever. It just started out because I was going abroad to study and I'd collected about a list of 50 trusts and scholarships by going on trust doors and knocking their doors. To find out which trusts are legitimate and which are not and which would give money. And I had an amazing list of 50 trusts and scholarships. And I'm like, I don't know who to pass it on to. How does this list continue to build? And why is it that everybody has to keep reinventing the wheel every time? You know, we're constantly doing that. We don't have systems and processes that we can refer to. So hence that group with a big name because of search engine optimization, right? You put every single searchable word and it'll hit the jackpot. That's what happened with that big title that's there on Facebook. And I said, okay, even if we can put one opportunity a week, that's 1 year covered. I added 160 of my unsuspecting friends, and now it's about 50,000 plus people on that group. It's a different thing that the Facebook is a completely soon to be alienated platform in some sense. So we are rethinking about, and hence the brand and what we want to do with it. Now, is this a responsibility that we want to take on and drive the space for creative professionals who fall across the spectrum, because there really isn't space for people who are doing the in-between work. You know, artists also end up managing, but they're not called arts managers. But that's where they make their money. So how do you sort of work through these idiosyncrasies that we operate in the sector? So from that, I'd like to sort of move into a little bit about the arts management context, particularly what we have been working with and understanding, gaining an understanding of in the last 3 years in particular, but also the last decade or so of working in the sector. So I just wanted to sort of draw the difference between management in the arts and management of the arts. And this is the traditional definition of management in the arts, which is you're using business management tools to manage cultural organizations and processes and systems. That's pretty much what it is. However, management of the arts, if you look at it more granularly, you're managing arts within an organization, you're managing a project, or you're managing, I'm not sure if you can read it, but that's activity, right? So you could be managing a team, a licensing job, not necessarily a massive project, but a project could be something much bigger. The Affordable Art Festival could be a project that you're managing within an organization. Or the case of an organization, of course, Museum of Goa being one. So your work as an arts manager would evolve and change and sometimes devolve on the basis of what are you expected to do, but the tools remain the same. And it's important for us to understand the difference across these three. Before we move further into arts management, I just wanted to take a step back and talk about the framework of how and what is culture. How do we look and identify and define culture? There are three broad definitions. They are not interchangeable, but they can operate all together. So the first one being culture as a way of life, encompassing shared values, beliefs, systems, customs, behaviors that society members pass on to future generations. So for instance, Ganeshotsav is also culture. You know, so you've got that layer of culture that we're talking about. A religious ritualistic, where a community comes together, is also a part of your culture. The fact that Indians are very loud on planes is a cultural connection that people draw, so to speak. But the difference between that and the more narrower definition is culture as an artistic expression. So the fact that I can dance and paint and sing is the formal context that we operate in as the culture sector, arts sector. Refers to creative artistic expressions and is mainly associated with the arts, so visual, performing, literary, and so on. Right? Further on, what we've seen particularly in the last 100 years or so, that there are formal ways of organizing these cultural activities. right? So you've got organizations coming in, you've got policies coming in, you've got trade of cultural goods, and that's just sort of increased over the last century. You could say it sort of started with means of mass production that emerged in the first part of the previous century, whether it was film or mass printing, and what that led to as an industry. So the term cultural and creative industry is a much recent development, a recent import. I am going to highlight these terms with a caveat everywhere. I'm deeply critical of using the term cultural and creative industries because it's a direct import from the West, particularly the UK. And it's also extremely challenging because I just see it as a neo-colonial, cultural economic terminology that we have to very critically think about while using. It's a good framework to look at what is going on, but I wouldn't take it on as a term that we should be using for our country unless we choose to define certain terms our way. Because the way we work with and the context we operate in is very different. So I just wanted to highlight that before getting further into this definition. So of course this is related to mass production, commercialization and distribution of cultural products with an aim to get profit. So everything from Netflix to film industry to music industry to publishing, you have that entire spectrum of cultural and creative industries. But if an artist is trying to make work in a museum context, which is a not-for-profit space, that may or may not typically be a part of the system, but it's still considered to be a part of the broader creative economy in certain countries. So what's happening is that, I mean, I haven't covered it in the presentation, but just to sort of give you a little bit of a context, there are various models of defining cultural and creative industries. One of the models that I usually go into quite a bit is the walk model. For me, on a sort of visual level also it sort of makes sense, right? So there are, now that we've looked at these definitions, in that model they speak of the core creative fields within the creative industries. And I'm just going to move on to the next slide. Oh, no, sorry, going back. I'll come back to this. The core creative industries which require a larger degree of creativity to generate goods. So for instance, music, right? But the music industry can be a part of the external. So writing would be a part, but publishing would be a part of the external circumference. So you have the core cultural creative expressions and then the industry surrounding that. To me that sort of makes a lot more sense. So then your indie music becomes a part of your core cultural context, and then you've got the peripheral cultural context, which is your larger music industry, the more commercial music industry. And that's easier to sort of then dislocate some of these selling out conversations that we sort of try and engage with. If you don't have theatre, how do you have a successful film industry? If you don't have strong theatre training, how is it that you can have something like a series of amazing shows coming up on Netflix, right? With strong cultural content emerging out of it. So these are the sort of things I wanted to problematize a little bit, and also please feel free to challenge me as we go along. So from here I wanted to move a little bit about defining art. I just wanted all of us to sort of at least come on a similar platform and then engage with these terminologies. So this is slightly chronological as well. So has anybody done art history here, engaged with art history in any way, chronological way of understanding the definitions of art? Okay, so then this might be giving you a good perspective of that. So when you talk about like anything before 1800s, right, you've got about the Natya Shastras, you've got this notion of art as being identified with beauty and human achievement, right? So this amazing, composition by one particular composer in a Carnatic tradition, made for a royal who's the perfect rasik and can appreciate it. So art is beauty and human achievement, right? And then you're talking about like post 1800s and the world becoming smaller, a lot more interaction and trade happening on a much more global scale, to a certain extent colonization happening, subjectivity start coming in. So then there is art being based on the notion of subjectivity, like I think this is art as an artist, or the way you perceive it. So impressionism becomes a way of accessing that visual, which is not just based on the notions of beauty and human achievement, right? It's based on subjective understanding of that particular object or that artwork. And then of course moving on a little bit post Second World War, a stronger aesthetic relationship between the object and the consumer. How is it that I relate to the Campbell soup can or the Duchamp, commode in that sense? So how is it that I'm relating to these objects, and how is it that I am redefining value of these objects as different from only being identified as art as beauty and human achievement. So these are the negotiations of value around art that we have seen emerge over the last, let's say, about 200 years. It's not like it didn't exist before that, but just to give us a sense of how the transition has been. And the reason why I'm problematizing that is because all of these debates become very challenging when we talk about arts management. I'm often asked, my mother always asks me the question, what are you making your career in? Like, why would people go and watch this stuff? I don't like to go. She doesn't come to half the things I do, right? So she doesn't value it, which is her subjectivity of what she chooses to value. But as arts managers, we have to be conscious of these parallels, these parallel definitions, no matter what positions you occupy or appreciate, is because the first two are centered on the process of disseminating a predefined order. So my previous avatar, before I started doing what I'm doing right now, I used to work with the NCPA. So I very beautifully fit into the first two categories. So I have seen the most incredible Indian music and dance play out on the stages, theatre, everything, like really incredible. But I often had the feeling of disseminating a predefined order. Like, this is good art, you have to tell people it's good art. I liked it. I just could not locate the relevance of this good art with what the community was finding relevant. And those were my internal ideological complexities that I was trying to negotiate in terms of notions of value. And this is where the third part of the sort of arts management context comes in. The aesthetic relationship is where you sort of start looking at consumer behavior and marketing, which become a part of the process of creation itself. So if now you're creating an affordable art festival, you'll start thinking about who's going to come for it. Who's going to buy art? What are people looking for? That positionality, the artist, there's a broader term called the artist is dead, which is often referred to in the context of contemporary art. Very nicely sitting into that last definition. So as arts managers, we have to be a little conscious about where you are located in this and what positions of the debate are you engaging with various stakeholders as you're going along. So just these very obtuse big contexts, let's try and look at it from the lens of funding. I'm sorry you can't see the green one, but I'll take you through it as we go along. So pre-1800s, you've got royal and religious patronage for the arts. So you've got Michelangelo being commissioned by the church to do what he's doing. We've got the various gharanas being patronized by various royal families here. You've got the Devdasi tradition. There are lots of that kind of patronage, but also there's folk art. Right? So there's art of the people and there's art that is patronized, except the art of the people is not really considered as art in the broader canon of how we understand and access these terminologies. Then you're talking about, of course, colonialism across the world. Well, mostly post 1600s, but I've looked at 1800s as one very broad sort of century to move towards, simply because you also had a significant amount of counterculture movements at that time. So whether it was counter-independence, the 1857 War of Independence or the Civil War in America, you are having a counter response to colonialism much more strongly in this century, and hence picked that a little bit, and also emergence of mass production and mass media, which was in some sense developing into a cultural industry. So the movement of cultural goods that are happening even during colonial times, the great exhibitions that were happening at that time. There are nascent formations of the culture industry, and then it's much stronger from there into the early part of the 20th century, because you've got film, you've got commercial theatre, you've got magic shows. This is in the West. In India, you've got film, you've got photography, you've got Ravi Verma, calendar art, lithographs. It's going crazy, it's going nuts. You're using it for nationalism. It's like a huge amount of movement happening, and there are people who are like, I don't care about, you know, the goddess Saraswati on the poster, but I'm getting to make money off it. So there's a complete different approach and emergence to the whole context of the cultural industry that we talk about up until, of course, 1947. Again, I'm locating the year very specifically to bring it back to our context. From 1947 to 1991, what's happening? What's happened in 1947? It's just
Indian independence.
Indian independence. So British have gone. So now what is the state trying to do?
Patronize.
Patronize. Oh, sorry, I thought it was you who was talking. You were like scared when I was looking at you. Oh shit, sorry. Yeah, so there are the state is becoming a patron. So it also happened after the French Renaissance, in some sense, when you had you know, the state taking on the role of the patron, or in this case the royal family, or you know, the government institutions, art institutions that were established by the British at that time, they're being taken over by the state, and the state is taking on the role to build cultural infrastructure. So that's actually what you can't read. Government and independent arts organizations are emerging, and further sort of solidification of the cultural industry. So your film industry is becoming much stronger at that time. Your music industry is becoming much stronger at that time. And then you've got post 91, what happened in 91? Right, so there is global trade of goods and services, and this is also happening across the world. The wall has also come down a couple of years, Berlin Wall has come down a couple of years ago. So it's just sort of, the world's just become suddenly opened up. You know, you've got television coming in into most of these new universes or markets for other people, and a stronger thrust of cultural and creative industries, but also emergence of cultural entrepreneurship. Sorry, yeah.
I just have a question. 1947, that's 2 years after the end of the World War II.
Yes.
Was it also
yes. It's all connected. So the previous definition when I was talking about this, the subjectivity, I'd mentioned the Second World War, and there was a lot of disorientation as well, right? Like people were not able to deal with what Second World, so everything was coming out post 1944. So what was it was a complete dislocation everywhere, and of course the countries, they just had to let go of the colonized nations in some sense. So there is a lot of global, I just see them as parallels everywhere in some sense. There's always a mirror across. So I've already explained this a little bit. So in India at that time, culture is a way of life as well, along with that happening. Between 1800s and 1947, the British are establishing art institutions. We never had formal art training centers. In Bombay, the JJ School of Art was started, so the folk artists could be brought in and trained, and they were making, you know, the reliefs on the you know, the CSMVS building and the Victoria Terminus and things of that sort. So you had craftspersons and their families being brought over to Bombay to make work. Actually, if any of you have had a chance to go to the BDL Museum, please go look at the models that they made. And these were also, they were also researching on India, right? And they were taking all of this back to the UK. So they're sort of making these models of what are the professions in Bombay. So you can see the fisherwoman, you can see the Parsi man doing trade, all kinds of things that are happening. And all of these models are still there in Bhavdaji Lal. These were being commissioned by the British at that time, some to be taken to the UK to show people what's happening here, but also so that they could train local skilled craftspeople to build the infrastructure that they were building. That's where art institutions were established. I mean, in some sense, we've always been a very visual culture. You know, we like, even in our music and dance forms, a very performing and visual culture. So we like them both together. So I think even when theatre came as there was always a version of theatre, of course, we all know that. But when you had the stage, the proscenium stage, is when you had a different emergence of theatre training and response to the work. So you've got like the Parsi theatre and the Marathi theatre and the Gujarati theatre, which are full-on commercial theatres. And if you sort of try and see the parallels, I mean, I love this part all the time. So you have the Marathi stage, which is what Raja Ravi Verma was looking at that time. And Raja Ravi Verma had a printing press, which is where Dada Saheb Phalke was working. And I'll come back to who these personalities are as well. And around that same time, Ravi Verma is being trained under a Dutch painter, which is where he learned the style of painting that he did. He was never formally trained. So you've got all these movements. So what's happening at that time is a lot of Ravi Verma paintings actually have the poshak, the dress that he's wearing of the Marathi stage actors. So when you see like the Kerala style of sari and the Navwari, it's all coming from the Marathi, the ornamentation from the Marathi stage. And then of course, you know, Raja Ravi Verma is considered to be a landmark in spite of the fact that he was not really a good painter. That's just my opinion. Let me put a caveat to that. But he's making these incredible visuals of Indian gods and goddesses. Around the time there was this nationalistic fervor also going, and there's mass production of these visual images, right? And Dada Saheb Phalke was working with him. Suddenly, you know, 20 years later, there is Raja Harishchandra, which are the very similar iconography that's happening. So I'm just like, for me, I find it really fascinating, these interconnections between, you know, all of these movements of cultural professionals, and how we'll touch upon that in Goa, where we are as well. So all of this is happening at this time, right? There's gramophone that has also come in. So, Alamara was 1937, 31 or 37? No, Alamara, the first talkie in India? I think 37, but so just to sort of give you a context of what all was happening at that time. And then, like I was earlier mentioning, 1947 to 1901, you've got cultural infrastructure. You've got spaces like, you know, the NCPA being built, the Kala Academy being built, all of these spaces are being built. Regulation is coming in. There's censorship in theatre, which actually is a pre-colonial law or colonial law, which continues to be implemented in some sense. Private initiatives are starting at that time, as I had mentioned. You know, there are several film studios which have now become sort of formal companies, directors are coming, all of those kind of things. And then you've also got industry growth. Generally in those places, they are being formally recognized as industries. It's little later, I think the only formal industry in this country today in the cultural and creative context is the film industry. That's the only recognized industry in the country. It was as late as 1997, and there's been no other so far. And then of course cultural and creative industries and cultural entrepreneurship, which I've anyways talked a lot about. So this is just a little bit through a lens of funding. So we've covered theory of culture, like how is culture looked at, the definitions of art and connecting it to arts management, and now looking at through the lens of funding. So this is how, again, I just want to put forth that a lot of this is coming from our research. There isn't much that's written on how the cultural sector in India is organized. This is a lot what we have done, you know, when we've spoken to people and looked at whatever is there and created our own structures of understanding how the sector is. So there are three broad areas in which you can look at the cultural sector in India. One is the government run, very clear. The government gives the money, the space runs, salaries come from the government money, that's how it's run. Even in the government, there are two. There's the state government money and the central government money, like most industries. We've got the not-for-profit sector, which includes public charitable trusts. NCPA is a public charitable trust. CSMVS is not a government-run organization. So it's kind of interesting how these spaces are emerging, and then of course there's complete for-profit, right? So this I will come to, where have you been so far and where you categorize. But I wanted to sort of bring this back to, I was talking about co-cultural creative sectors and peripheral cultural creative sectors. This is broad, even when we do our research, we look at these subsectors. The first broader definition of the cultural and creative industries that came out actually included 13 subsectors, including software. So it was obviously heavily critiqued. But if you have to look at, sectors that look at creativity at the core of it, these would typically fall into it. You might be able to add more. I realized I haven't added digital to it, which is huge right now. So, I mean, every time I look at it, like literally every 4 months, I feel like I need to add something more, right? It's changing so fast. So, of course, performing, visual and literary is quite clear. Technically, poetry would also fall under literature and publishing, but poetry, it's gaining its own new life in this decade as well, right? And then you've got the commercial creative industries, which cover all of this. Design is becoming much bigger than it ever was. Advertising used to be big. Now advertising, it feels like it's going down, and design is emerging as the next big industry, so to speak. And of course, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention digital, but digital. And now we'll move on to understanding the role of the managers. So a little bit about this. So who are the stakeholders when you're managing an arts organization, activity, or a project? These are the broad categories of stakeholders. So you've got the government, artists, board of directors, funding agencies, patrons, donors, consumers, volunteers, financial institutions, unions, and associations. Anybody you think we're missing out on? Public, yeah. So we've covered consumers and audiences. Yeah. Okay. Clearly not. All right. So I just wanted to touch upon how are these organizations or projects managed. So typically when we talk, there are the cultural and creative industries, but then there are also the not-for-profit sector. So I've sort of mixed both. There are many more different kinds of governance, but typically this is what you would see in the broader cultural sector. Well, I'll come to the cultural sector, but there's CEO dominant, board dominant, staff dominant, and collective governance. CEO dominant, of course, is largely works with larger and well-established not-for-profit organizations. So a lot of the cultural sector research and organizational structure and those kind of contexts come from the not-for-profit part of management in the larger management studies. It doesn't really come from for-profit. So if I have to work with decoding or restructuring or rethinking about the sector, I have to look at NFPs. So board dominant are smaller newer NFPs which have a board and they drive those conversations and decisions. Staff dominant and collective governance. I'm skipping them over for a reason because we feel that these are the more dominant ones in the arts. So when you have a CEO dominant, these are larger and well-established organizations which are mainly led by a particular person with a clear focus there. There is founder dominant. Small and big arts organizations, a big mix. I'm skipping over a little bit. Funder dominant, led by vision and wishes of the funder, sorry. Staff dominant, professional bureaucracy such as hospitals or government art centers. Like, it doesn't matter what the dean says. If the peon or the curator has not come on time, you're not going to be able to see that gallery because they have the keys, right? So it's very, very staff dominant and collectives. So just to sort of give you that context in terms of Goa, I was sitting with the MOG team earlier and I was just sort of sifting through some names. So where do you think Kala Academy would fit?
No, God, don't start.
Sorry?
Don't start.
Staff, yeah, okay. MOCA, Mocha?
I'm here.
Hi. Where do you think you fit?
I think they are with the board dominant.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, okay. Sunaparanta?
Funder.
Okay, that's great. There's Sadhana Dalarte, which I believe is a new space, right? It opened only last year. No? Museum of Goa?
Staff
Found.
dominant.
Goa Artist Collective?
Correct.
Yeah, it's a little obvious. Gitanjali Art Gallery?
Founder.
Okay, and Serendipity? Yeah, it's more funder than founder. I think a debate in the morning got resolved. Okay, so just to give you a sense of how these organizations, you could typify them because as an arts manager, the way you engage with these organizations therefore change. If I'm dealing with a staff dominant organization, I have to be the best friends with the guard. Literally, I mean, just yesterday I was posting something and I said, who run your organization, who runs your house, the housekeeping staff. You don't run your run your house, right? So you have to keep that in mind. So it depends on what kind of governance there is. You have to understand who do you have to work within the power system to make sure you're able to push the agenda forward. Arts is not an easy place to be in. It's very relationship heavy, especially in India. Let me bring that context back to India. So how do you operate in these scenarios? So a little bit about who manage the arts, right? Producers, executors, but do you think makers and creators also manage the arts? So everybody almost ends up managing the arts. Do we have exclusive artist roles who don't do any arts management at all? You're constantly managing something, right? So if you have to put up a show, you still have to make sure everything is being done right, right? Even though you are the artist. So these roles are interchangeable. Often you might have a dominant maker-creator role and a less dominant producer-executor role. So it's the dominance that changes. But in a sense, everybody has to play the role of the arts manager one way or the other. Okay, so who all manage the arts? Just a repeat: directors, founders, heads of arts organizations, young professionals employed in the sector, freelancers, independent cultural professionals, practicing artists and entrepreneurs. This is the kind of roles that are included in arts management. Let me, sorry, can you tell me what you do? Your name and then what you do.
Okay, I'm Dandina and I'm working in MOG.
Oh, you're working in MOG.
Yeah.
What do you do?
I'm a storyteller and
Okay.
art educator.
Art educator. So where would you fit into all of this?
Education.
Great, great. Anywhere else where you think you might fit in? Little bit of that you do? Operations. Anything else? No? Okay.
Research analysis.
Yeah, yeah. So mostly we are doing all of this. Like we are occupying at least 2-3 roles. So if you think in India you're going to do just finance and budgeting, no. Unless you're in a massive arts organization, we don't have massive arts organizations in this country. But it's important to therefore recognize that what your core role is and what else are you handling. And therefore if you to develop additional skills, what else do you engage with to develop those skills so you can do your core function better. Right? So for instance, I'll give you my example. What do I do? All of it. No, the first thing I thought when I was with the NCP, I was handling communications, but I very soon moved to outreach. So in some sense, I'm looking at education outreach and to a certain extent, audience development. But I very soon realized a lot of it was about management because NCP is a board dominant organization. So I had to sort of manage various stakeholders in order to get our work done, right? Today, as an entrepreneur, I'm actually dealing with everything. So I have no excuse to not learn finance and budgeting or fundraising because the government will come behind me. I have to file GST every month. So you just don't have an option. So you have to take on those additional roles and take it on with aplomb because it's only going to help you do your co-work better. Or at least when you hire when you're able to hire someone, you can delegate better. Yeah. So it helps with both.
When you were with NCP, what did you say you did?
Communications, but and very soon.
How did you distinguish that from outreach?
So technically I was in marketing. That's where it falls under. But you don't actually differentiate too much with outreach, but I moved on to the outreach role. So very soon I realized that when we were working and they were asking us, hey, people are not coming, where is press? And I was like, the world has changed. People don't come just with press articles anymore. And that's when I started investigating audience development as a space. And that's when I got the ATSA, South Asia Management Fellowship. I developed an entire proposal on audience development for the arts and I started NCP's first outreach department. So we worked with every internal curation team, music, dance, theatre, to layer all of the programming, additional outreach programming and develop relationships with schools, colleges, employees who worked in the area. So like the Zakir Hussain concert in the evening, in the morning you would get 1100 kids in. If it was a Malavika Sarukai, there would be a dance demonstration, 800 kids in. So that's what we would do to kind of create that, think about a 20-year timeline of audience development. So that's where it fits in. So yeah, there were two roles. One I greedily took over. Okay, so these are some of the key skills that are required to manage the arts. I mean, there are obviously several, but I think these three are, you have these and you're fine, you know. Typically what will happen is that job skills is what you learn on the job or some amount of training that you do in your college. When I say in your college, I literally mean in your college because there's no formal training course in arts management in this country. There's no undergraduate degree in arts management. If you go abroad and study arts management, you can't really apply it here. The context is completely irrelevant, right? So what you actually end up doing is, in whatever you do, only end up learning your job skills or even on the job. What's missing is knowledge. We don't understand how the arts sector operates, right? What's missing even more, unfortunately, is interpersonal skills. We don't know how to write emails properly. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm not saying, I mean, I can speak for myself. I learned very slowly as well, right? Time management. We just don't know, there's so much that we have to do. We just don't know how to, tick that to-do list. I can see sniggers across the room. Teamwork and problem solving. These are not skills that are taught to us. And the thing is, we're working with a range of consultants in our research, right? And you can clearly see the difference of people who are trained in, even in the undergraduate degrees, maybe in business, and people who are trained in art schools. A world of difference. Art school students, even though they're more primed to get into the cultural sector as arts managers, have no interpersonal skills. It's not taught. They are not able to think beyond a point. And I'm generalizing, but it's deeply depressing, to have that kind of talent who you can't train to get all of this. So my thing is, like, knowledge and interpersonal skills can still be gained, right? It's no great shakes. There are tons of online courses. Job skills is what you learn on the job. The others, if you're observant and you can manage, and if you have the ability, you will gain on the job. But unfortunately, because we don't have an existing resource or enough of a database to work with, when I say database, I also mean knowledge base to work with in this country, it takes 10 years by the time you understand what's going on in the sector, right? So anybody who's a new entrant in the sector, their learning time doubles, which is a pity, because it's an incredible amount of talent, and if all they need is a few more things right at the beginning, so they can deliver a lot more very early on, as opposed to being able to do that at 28, 29, 35, whatever the ages are. So that's I feel like a big gap. And some of you, as you've mentioned, work within organizations, run organizations. It's something for you to think about as well. Like when you're thinking of your teams and building their teams, what are the key skills that you need to see in them as improvement as well? It's not good enough that they've handled a project well, but how have they delivered on that project across these three? How much knowledge have they gained? Because if that doesn't occur, they won't be able to do bigger and better projects faster. So the learning curve will not be sharp enough. Okay, what are the challenges of managing the arts? So we've got, of course, leadership and governance. That's, got leadership and governance. There is very rarely any succession planning. And that's a huge challenge overall. There are several heads of organizations who have no second in command at all. And these are bigger organizations, I'm not even going into smaller organizations. Marketing and financial planning is another big gap. Funding, SOPs. That's a real pity, because this is where the community can get together and sort of share, how do I run an event? How do I have an artist contract? How do I safeguard myself, within the organization? And all it takes is for a few organizations to get together and put this learning, and then you can save so much more time, right? That I feel is a big gap, a big challenge for people working in the sector. Transparency is another big challenge. Precarity of creative labor. How many of you are working as full-time employees, and how many of you are working as consultants or freelance? Okay, freelance. Let's start with that. I can't see. Just freelance, project consultants. Okay, 4, 5. Full-time? Okay. And the others?
Interfering busybody.
Huh? So for the others, is arts a part-time interest or nothing? Okay. So typically,
It's for you all. Not for us. For you.
So typically what we've seen is that the way the cultural sector has changed over the last, particularly the last 2 decades, is that there are very few full-time roles, or even if you're employed, you're a consultant. And that's just the nature, the sector is not organized, but that creates an issue, what we call precarity, coming from precarious, is it's very risky. And it creates a host of other problems, right, from mental health challenges in the cultural sector, which we are definitely not getting into today. But it's another massive Pandora's box that needs to be opened up at some point. But, it starts from there. It starts from exploitation. People will take you on board for contracts but not pay you, delay payments. It leads to a lot of, you don't have health insurance. It leads to a lot of precarity, which is also the reason why a lot of people who would be brilliant in the cultural sector move away into the for-profit space. They'll move into the film, music, whatever, where they can make more money, or they'll move into other careers, and which is such a loss to the cultural sector. So that is a big challenge, and of course stakeholder management. And that's obvious at all times. So that's pretty much what I have overall on the arts sector and how it's changed and evolved, and the role of the arts manager. So the creative class is Dr. Richard Florida is a sociologist and economist based out of the US, and he propounded this theory of the creative class, talking about a socio-economic class of knowledge-based workers. So we've moved from a product-based economy, manufacturing-based economy, to a knowledge-based economy. So in that, you're talking about workers who are using creativity as a core way of driving innovation and growth. So and it cuts across sectors, yeah. So it's not only the arts and cultural sector. So you've got science, engineering, education, computer programming, research with arts, design and media. Liberal arts is gaining more traction today than it ever did. So all of those changes we are seeing now. Now, these people, othering us, fully engaged in the creative process, and our primary job function is to be creative and innovative. Like, when did that happen 30 years ago? But that's the creative class that he's talking about in his terminology. And he further says that cities which attract and retain creative residents prosper, while those who do not stagnate. So he's given examples like New York, Paris, London as examples. I mean, in India we can think of Bombay as that example, because you've got industry, but you've also got the media and entertainment industry as well, drawing a very different kind of talent and energy into the city. What he speaks about is the 3 T's which make the city creative: talent, tolerance and technology. A highly talented, education skilled population, tolerance of course, live and let live, and technology, technological infrastructure that's necessary for growth. And he says that creative workers are looking for cultural, social and technological climates in which they feel they can best be themselves. Now I just wanted to relocate this in some of the, I was reading up articles of what's happening in Goa, why are so many creative professionals moving to Goa, and these are some of the quotes that came up, right? So Mayank Jain, who's an entrepreneur, said, my criteria was very clear: clean air, less traffic, nice weather, small town, culturally active, scenic and good internet. Sorry? So that I've learned recently, but I also know, because 91 Springboard has also moved here, and I know that for the last 3 years they've been actively lobbying with the Goa Chamber of Commerce to sort of lay new lines. So there is interesting movement happening, not necessarily within the cultural space, but across, where people are moving into Goa. So Abhay Singh said he understands the concept of balance better. I also get to gloat over my counterparts in metros who spend hours a day twiddling their thumbs over steering wheel. And this is actually the managing director of Goa Tourism, who said that his reasons, according to him, why people are moving to Goa: tolerance, respect for privacy. We don't blow our lids off at the sight of a scantily clad woman. We don't look twice when women take their scooters out at night. If there's a startup next door, no one's peeping in. You don't get this anywhere in India, and many people are realizing the value of it. So I just thought it interesting to locate this in the broader context of why is it that a certain kind of talent is moving in, and I wanted to problematize this further. I'll also talk about the kind of labor that's moving in as well, but which is where it is, not everything is rosy. So the challenges are the creative class recolonizes an urban center. So your beautiful old Goan houses are, being used, but it's being taken over by the outsiders. I'm dreading to say the word, but I have put that word deliberately and provocatively in. Classist and labor myopia, that this creative class does not look at my guard outside, who's also moving here, right? I mean, why is he's not important? It's not looking at the migrant workers who are coming into the city to build your homes. There's no place for them, right? They are expected to come to your city for 6-8 months with their kids, build your homes, and then go back. So these are the kind of contexts that are deeply problematic. Changing local cultures. Apparently, I was just having a conversation with someone earlier, and now people are expected to work 10 hours a day in Goa, which never used to happen before. So what does that mean? There are no judgment calls here. It's just, we're just trying to understand what is going on the other side of the spectrum of this conversation as well. Gentrification is a problem with creative class. It's a deeply destructive problem that has been outlined repeatedly with the creative class. You come in, artists come, it gets gentrified, rents become expensive, and locals are priced out. Right? There are anti-tourism movements happening in Venice, in Barcelona, in all kinds of places, right? Bandra is a beautiful example of gentrification, right? Nobody can live in Bandra anymore because of the insane rent. So what happens when you have the inclusion of creative class? Also, something to think about is it, on the one side it might seem inevitable, but how do you deal with it respectfully and interestingly, that you take advantage of it, but also acknowledge some of these challenges so that it doesn't overwhelm and overtake you as well, right? So supply side of trickle down economic theory, which is, you cut taxes for the rich and obviously more jobs will be created. It never happens. So that's the kind of economic theory that the creative class context is built on, which is sort of problematic because it's never worked like ever. So it looks very good, but I also want to talk about creative class and creative city and think about another kind of city policy movement we are talking about, smart city. Anybody heard of that? So just to sort of think about where these terminologies are actually coming from, and what does it hold for all of us as active participants in the economic process.
You're talking about changing local culture. Does it mean that we assume that the local culture is something static in a watertight compartment and it should not interact with the other cultures? One culture, what it is not the same one after Portuguese came. It got completely changed, and the same change is taking place. Change comes when the people meet together. So are you presuming that the local culture should remain static in a watertight compartment?
I love your points. I really appreciate them. No, actually I don't. And that's a very good point that you're raising. And I appreciate that you're raising it. Not everybody views it that way. The outsider-insider debate is very much strong. So while I agree with you that change is the only constant thing, there are several people who want to hold on. They don't want to change or use that as a debate to then win seats. You know how that works. So it's exactly that problem. Change cannot be stopped, but the fact is the concept of creative class or any kind of migration will result in change. How and to what extent the change will happen and how does it affect stakeholders across the value chain is what we need to sort of discuss and deal with and engage with, is what we're talking about. Yeah.
If I may.
Please, yeah.
You're saying that change itself is not the problem. I don't think anyone is saying change is the problem. Not even the person who's arguing against the outsider. They're saying the scale and the time within which it's happened. Which is exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
This is what we
So the nuances. So let's understand what the problem is. It's very easy to talk about the outsider-insider debate. It's not going to resolve any problem. We've had the outsider-insider debate, Shiv Sena. What has it resolved? The problem is much deeper. The problem is who is coming in, what are they colonizing when they come in. If someone comes in and says, okay, I bought this plot, I'm going to build an 18-story building in front of my beautiful like 1.5-story bungalow. How is that fair? So these are the problems, that the nuances. In a WhatsApp university world, we don't want to engage with nuances. And that is what we need to deconstruct when we are talking about this as well. Of course, not inclusive. The working class and poor are being pushed to the periphery. Like, today, it's kind of funny in Bombay that Bandra was the place about 10-15 years ago, right? Everybody would go there. That was the outside, and the townies needed a passport to come to Bandra. Now, the new suburb, of course, Andheri happened because of the television industry, the new suburb is now Chembur. And it's interesting what's happening there as well, right? So, the periphery constantly is being pushed. And there are new peripheries in emerging, and now, of course, the working class and the poor are being shifted to Mahol, where they are dying with, pollution and all of the stuff around the industrial belt. It's crazy what's going on. So, what that does to the group that appears to be on the lowest level on the value chain is also something that we need to think about. I'm sorry for making this a very depressing Sunday morning. So, just a little bit of a look into Goa. We'll get quick faster. So why is it that people are moving into Goa? It has the highest per capita income in the country, which effectively means that it's very high quality of life. The spending powers are higher. You can access more amenities and facilities than you would anywhere else in the country. The culture of Goa is very attractive. I mean, there's a soft power context, easy lifestyle. Nobody looks at you twice. You can do what you want, kind of a thing. But also soft power. We have a very culturally active scene here. There is stuff happening constantly. New initiatives are being started constantly. So if you want to participate in the social ecosystem through culture, it can happen very easily in Goa. Quality of life I've already mentioned. Labor movement, this was interesting. When I was earlier mentioning about migrants, the migrant population is 20% of the overall population in Goa. I think the tourist population is about 3 times. 18 million, I believe, that come each year. And as of 2011, obviously, hopefully there'll be a new statistic coming up, but 30% of the migrant workers are in the tourism industry, right? So and the jobs that they occupy are low-skilled jobs. So the people who are actually coming in and contributing to the economy are low-skilled jobs. The creative class is not including them, right? So when we are talking about the new wave of artists coming in, we cannot not include the other support staff that make all of this happen. So if you want a culturally vibrant place, there's so much going on, you want to build your careers in Goa and live, who else is a part of that ecosystem is something we need to think about, and how do we include those perspectives into any kind of discussions and debates that we are doing. So these are, we were just discussing about the kind of organizations that have emerged here and how it's actually, and feel free to tell me how you think they have or have not added to the vibrancy of the cultural offering in the city, in the state. So you've got the Serendipity Arts Festival, you have Curioso, co-working spaces have emerged, Village Studio, which I believe has now changed hands as well, Moda Goa Museum. Some of these have not even started, but they are still creating an energy, and even though they are started by people who've been in Goa and have Goan roots, the talent pool that's helping build is still from all over the country, right? Which is kind of interesting, like how you're able to draw that kind of talent here to create new, stronger work and contexts in this country. Bus Ride, Mimesis, Decotarium are some of the others. Feel free to add to it if you think there have been interesting ones that have been emerging. But what's interesting to note is only the last 3 to 5 years, and who's initiating them, how is it added positively or negatively into the space. And personally I find this really attractive because suddenly it sort of really opens up for anybody what they think they can do with their time in a state that generally affords you to, for you to choose what you want to do in that sense, which is not always possible. In Bombay, you have to make money. Otherwise, you can't survive. It's damn difficult to do the work that you want to do if you're not making a certain amount of money. So those are the kind of pressures that we need to think about a little bit. Challenges, these are some of the challenges that were shared with us when we did that last culture meet in Village Studio Goa last year by cultural professionals. So low pay scales is something that everybody has highlighted, that in spite of there's so much happening, when cultural professionals want to work on projects, the pay scales are really low. So this is just second-hand information that I've heard. There aren't as many networking opportunities. So people are constantly looking to connect with what all is going on and how do they meet each other. And there are very few connection points that are there. Relationship is something that also was mentioned about Goan residents. What is that relationship? There are people driving that kind of conversations. When I was in Serendipity last year, I know a lot of different people who I spoke to, both who, and we actually track people on the basis of how long they've lived in Goa, 20 plus years, 10 years, 5, just to sort of see the level of involvement with a cultural activity and a project. And what was interesting was that, obviously I'm not sharing any data, it's still not, but what was interesting that emerged out of that was that sense of responsibility for their slice of paradise was very much there, like in the sense that it's being thought about, that we are coming in and we are working here, but what are we adding to and what are we taking away? So it's not unconscious. The coming in and being a part of the ecosystem is not an unconscious. There is a thought that is being struck and being discussed from what I've heard in the community. Inability to maximize potential of the creative energies and people, that there's so much going on. How do we make this, what do we do with this energy? And there is that sense, a little bit of a sense of dislocation is what I've gathered, and infrastructure continues to be a challenge. And anything more that you want to add? This is pretty much the last slide, so it's open for debate, conversation, questions, challenges. Please challenge me, because this is hearsay, like this is second-hand information, not hearsay, but people have told me about this. It's not coming from primary research. So feel free to add to it.
Why so many graphic designers coming to Goa? You talked about advertising going down, but it's a fact. I mean, I've seen so many of them coming here.
Yeah.
What makes it profitable for them to come here? How do they work for you?
I think it's just the requirement to physically be there to do something. With graphic design, you don't physically need to be there to execute. All you need is a good internet connection and a good laptop with the softwares that you have. It's mainly that. Like something like my work, I have to go meet clients. I have to go to places and do research. For me, it would be damn difficult to locate to a city where I don't have that context. So yeah, I think just, yeah. Sorry, you had a question.
In the content creation part, when you have a Fox investing in Indian films, when you have a Disney collaborating with Star and investing in films, and on the other side you see a Tiger Global investing in TVF for the online content. Is it shifting towards the online sector? But I'm not talking about Netflix or Prime. I'm talking about YouTube specifically. So big companies investing in these content-driven small organizations, making them big, just making funny content. Is that changing the parameters?
Substantially. The live event sector is scared right now. all the monies are moving towards digital. Since Jio has come, the models have changed. The penetration of the smartphone has just transformed the market. So all the movement that you saw, actually when was the first NH7, 2006 or 2007? Between those years, NH7, the music festival, Weekender, NH7 Weekender. So it's now across some 6 cities, right? It was massive. I mean, during that time, your indie music scene just went up, right? And even now it's on, but there are tons of festivals. But consumption is moving to digital, completely. And the most interesting part is you can track this data. Please go watch Data Hacks. If anybody seen Data Hack on Netflix? Please go watch it. It will change your life. It did mine like last week when I was seeing it. No, it really makes you think about I think it was saying that today each one of us have about maybe 40 or 50 data points. So today if anybody wants to change election results in this room, they have enough data points to do that. So it's a deconstruct of the Cambridge Analytica. So I'm fascinated by it because we work with audience development, right? And for me, I was just like, wow, like from a completely non-judgmental perspective, this could be a minefield in terms of the good that you could do with it, but they did bad with it, and there's no stopping. You know, with what happens, digital is changing and changing everything around us. So yeah.
You mentioned about JJ School of Art. When the British came, they set up this this kind of institutions were set up where their idea was to train the local artisans and local artists so that they can create masterpieces. But there was another impact that was because of the contact with the Western knowledge and culture. 19th century Bengal Renaissance started, and as an offshoot of that, Bengal School of Art started, where their idea was to rediscover what is there in India. Much of the paintings were lost, but many of the sculptures still exist, and many of the masterpieces were created by Nandulal Bose and others.
Are still there. Even Gagendranath Tagore masterpieces, I mean, they're all there. They're not lost. They're very much there, the paintings. Yeah, no, I hear you.
Ancient paintings are mostly lost, except Ajanta. Most of the ancient paintings are lost, but ancient sculptures are there. And their idea, like Western Renaissance, to rediscover Greek and Roman art, and here rediscover old Indian art.
I actually disagree. The only reason being that when you think of art, you have to think about it. I feel you have to disassociate yourself a little bit from the Western canon to think also of the materiality of art. In India, we never worked with canvas until much later. The reason we just opened a show today in Bombay on before the canvas. It was all the surfaces that artwork was made on before the canvas. So India was primarily skilled for sculpture, relief work, all of that, right? Massive in that space. You had miniatures, paper, mica, glass, wood, cloth on wood, textile. This is what we were painting on. Jewelry, bejeweled jewelry, bejeweled fabrics. These were our artisanal cultures mainly. Canvas came much later. So when the canvas came, your ability to deal, wall paintings, murals, another part, right? Your ability to deal with that surface transformed what you were making. The art schools formalized that. Ravi Verma never had formal training because there was no Kerala. I mean, he learnt it through that painter who came, right? He had no formal training. Formal training was happening in JJ at that time. It was happening in the Madras Art School. It was happening in Kolkata. So these are the places, centers where they were established. Specifically speaking of Bengal, I think the Bengal Art School that you're talking about was a reaction to colonialism as well. The Indianness that Tagore talks about is a reaction to colonialism. So what would have, let's think of a hypothetical scenario. What if we didn't have the British? What kind of art would have emerged out of that with these kind of economic conversations without the dominance of colonialism? We don't know. So it's only going to be a matter of a question mark. What, however, is also important is to think about how Kalighat paintings got transformed with printing. Right? So when your lithograph started and your printing started, Kalighat paintings were always supposed to be these quick souvenirs for people. But that was also transformed with printing coming in. So transformations also happened because of technology, and it happened because of colonization, and it happened because of economics. So yeah. Yeah.
So if we look at the theory of the 3 T's that you mentioned, and if we just pick tolerance, and you look at the current political ecosystem, where do you think that the art and cultural sector would be in the coming, say, 10-20 years? How do you see that grow?
Okay, according to me, it's all the same animal. Any kind of right-wing sort of approach to policy making, let's start with policy making, is going to have 1 or 2 outcomes, right? It's going to be higher taxes, in that sense, not higher taxes, lower taxes for the rich, but also what's going to happen overall is that institutions and the kind of money that flows into it will be economic centric. Which is also a global sort of context, right? So you have an arts for art's sake model where you give which is where India still is currently. We still give money to the arts. The Ministry of Culture funds are for the art's sake. There is no expectation of it converting to an industry. So since we spoke about the UK, just giving UK as an example, you have the Arts Council funding that gives money only to arts and people can apply for grants and stuff, very similar to what you can do for Goa, your state government or the central government. It still exists, small amounts, minuscule amounts for the kind of work that we have in this country. On the other hand, it's the industry. The in-between space of philanthropy does exist, but for a country of this size is very little. With the current political climate, I feel what's happening is that overall, if you look at therefore these contexts, there possibly will be a way of talking to the government through the lens of economics, saying if you don't do this, this is the advantage that we cannot have with the direction that we could potentially go in. And that might change a direction. Right? There is a nationalistic thing. So when you can talk about, hey, how can we grow our industries? Hey, how can we? So there is that possibility at least that is there, because there is a very clear single agenda focus of what we want to do with policy making going forward. It's very evident in what you're saying. One example is, we were earlier, I think, I'm not sure who was mentioning about, we were talking about policy making, right? Jairam Ramesh in the parliament earlier this week spoke about NID. And I have like friends in NID from 30 years ago, and they were all telling me that, oh, someone's fed him this paper. So it makes me think about lobbying. We don't do any lobbying. So if done with the right way, it can actually enable law changes, because nobody cares about the cultural sector right now. What they care about is censorship. If you stay away from that, it can change, and there are possibilities there for sure. Money is being put behind culture. I have seen there's a report that's come out a few months ago by Art Tactic on art philanthropy in India. Since the changed CSR rules, it's gone up by about some, I don't know how many, I think it's from 600 to some 16,000 crores or something in terms of funding. It has changed. No, let me take that back. I don't know the figures. That's a very dangerous territory to go into. I'll get you the figures, but it has changed substantially. And so overall there is a change. There is a new layer of money that is coming in, the new money, and there is a deep interest in the larger creative sector. With this government, it may be easier to enable it, because your MLA is in the same party as the, right? In all likelihood, your MP is also of the same party. So if you know your MLA and MP and can start these conversations, it can actually impact. It's possible when you have one government with so many people all aligned. When you have a government that's not, it gets slightly harder. The challenge with this government in particular is inclusion-exclusion. That for me is deeply problematic, because I don't see any sight of that. And what therefore happens to the whole notion of quality. So you want to be able to do all of this, but who gets the tag of eminent institutions? Sorry, did anybody get that? The Ambani, Geo University getting the tag of eminent institute. When it's not even there. It's not set up. There is no building at all. So for me, and NID was the other one who got it. So that's what I'm worried about overall. It's in terms of direction, I think there is a possibility of there being that, of it coming together and evolving into something positive for the sector, but it's the levels of quality and what other agendas drive that, which I'm not sure. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just going to yeah, this is just to summarize in case anybody wants to, yeah, but what was the...
No, no, please.
No, it was just to give you a sense of what we've gone through. So we've, you know, I often find it helpful because then I can remember everything that I've attended in this lecture, is to summarize defining culture and art, what was arts management, the stakeholders, the different kinds of governance, the roles, key skills required. We covered challenges of managing in the arts, but we also went into creative class, the Goa context, and then of course challenges faced by arts professionals here. So that's where we ended. So it's formally over, but we can continue talking, yeah.